Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Road, the transportation industry podcast, where we talk all things transportation and logistics. Joining me today to talk about the trucking industry during December, the final month of our crazy year, is Josh Rivers. Josh is a sales team manager with ATS Logistics, and if you haven't listened before, he gives us a market update every month about what's going on in the trucking industry, the dry van, reefer, open deck, over-dimensional transportation marketplaces. Josh, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
What happens in trucking in December?
Well, I wanted to, so there's the obvious ones that happen, right? The weather goes out the window, there's snow, there's ice, there's rain, and, it gets cold, and obviously that has a play into it in the Christmas holiday. But I wanted to start with something that I don't know if it gets covered enough. I think we touched on it briefly last one. And I wanted to give it a little bit more love this time, is the hours for over-dimensional travel are going to decrease significantly because of daylight savings time, which recently happened. So some of you may notice that it feels like it's 30 days a night, and it's because it almost is.
Pretty much for me, yeah.
Yeah, so it is obviously most of your over-dimensional freight can only travel during hours of daylight. And when your hours of daylight are cut drastically, the hours that you can travel are also cut drastically. So when we get to December, we're going to be pushing into that portion of the year where, your sunset is 5, 6 o'clock at night.
Well, yeah.
And then sunrise is, 7, 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
So if your driver's hauling over dimensional freight, that is the only time he can drive, which coincidentally also means he can only drive during peak hours of like rush hour traffic. So when the sun's rising at 5, 6 in the morning, you can get out early and beat that rush. And when the sun doesn't set until, in Minnesota, we're lucky in the summer times, the sun doesn't set until, sometimes 9 o'clock at night, it feels like. So you get a lot of drive time out of that. And your driver can drive after the rush hours and before the rush hours and really avoid the traffic situation. But not anymore. Yeah. It's the only time that's available to them are these peak travel hours.
Yeah, and as you go north in the United States, the travel hours, they shrink.
Yes,
right?
It absolutely does. The sun sets earlier in the north and rises later. Somebody's going to have to fact check me on that. I think I remember this is like me thinking back to like high school, science classes, trying to figure out if that's true or not. So I think that's what I remember. Fact check me on that. I'm not 100% certain, but I do know that it's going across the country. It's going to severely restrict your drive time. Yeah. So something to think about, and I wanted to touch on that first because I don't think that gets a lot of love, and it's something that that shippers and carriers alike should be cognizant of. Yeah. Because you might not think of that until it's on the truck, and you're like, oh damn, this thing's not going to get there for another 3 days until the customer.
Is that a FMCSA regulation, or is that set by the state at the state level? I'm wondering if that's federal or
I'm not 100% certain. I have an over-dimensional handbook that I keep at my desk. I don't know.
It's just always present though.
Right. I don't know who wrote it, but I know that's the rules that we generally go by is
it's got to be the Department of Transportation.
I would imagine. But regardless, the hours available for travel for over-dimensional freight are going to reduce drastically. So that's something I wanted to put in front of people right away. And then we'll knock out the easy ones now. Obviously, in December, the biggest thing you got is Christmas. Christmas and New Year's are the biggest thing. And what's unique about that situation is obviously we have Thanksgiving in November. And at the time of recording this, we're eagerly awaiting the chaotic transportation situation that's going to come with Thanksgiving. The days leading up to it, the days shortly following it. Yep. But what's unique about the Christmas situation in the United States is that when drivers go home for Christmas, there's a very real chance, in fact, I would say it's likely that they won't fire the truck up again until after the new year. Because they, being independent contractors and a lot of these guys making their own decisions, owning their own trucks, or the independence that drivers want from being an over-the-road truck driver means that they go home and they park it on December 23rd and they say, hey, I'm not turning this thing back on until January 3rd or 4th or whatever. Yeah. And that'll create a lot of capacity crunches. And that's typically when we see the largest capacity crunch. One of the largest capacity crunches of the year is around that holiday timeframe, because when drivers go home, it's very hard to get them back out of the house and onto the road. Right. Because, if I was out on the road for the whole year and then I stay home for a week with my family, I'd have a hard time getting off the couch and going outside. The best football games are on. Right. Yeah. So It's going to be difficult. That's what causes a majority of the problems with transportation and logistics in the United States is the issues that come with the holiday and the capacity crunch that it brings. I actually I spoke with a customer today, had a quick conversation with one who they get all their transportation done and they have a hard cutoff on December 16th.
Sure.
They don't move freight after the 16th until after the new year. And I think that's genius. I think that's incredibly intelligent because they're completely sparing themselves the chaos that the holiday season brings. They don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
They're going to deal with the standard capacity and trailer type crunches that come with December. You know, there's a lot of food moving, so a lot of your dry van and reefer capacity gets soaked up because of the holidays demanding more capacity for food shipments. They're going to deal with some of the other struggles that come with the winter, the weather, things of that nature that come with December. But they get to avoid the biggest contributing factor, and I think that's massive. I mean, the amount of stress that must relieve for a customer to just, hey, everything that we're shipping is gone by the 16th. And if it needs to go after the 16th, it's going after the new year.
Right.
Because we don't want to deal with this. And I think that is insanely intelligent if you're in a position to do it. Now, I understand that every shipper is different. Every customer is different. You know, sometimes your product just can't. It's not feasible. You have to ship daily leading up to the holiday. Some people even ship over the holiday, which I think is crazy. But they have to do what they have to do. So, excuse me. I just finished lunch before I came over.
But so expect a capacity crunch in December.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting. People outside of the industry maybe don't realize how much of the overall capacity is owner-operator or independent contractor drivers.
I don't remember the exact numbers, and the numbers that we have now are definitely out of date. So I need to print off some new ones. But it's there's a reason people get into this line of work, right? Because of the promise of I make my own hours, I make my own schedule, I work when I want to work, and I only take the freight that pays me what I want to be paid. So that's something to keep in mind when, like we said, these drivers shut down. Yeah. The reason they chose this job is because they decide when they get back on the road.
I remember in years past, like 2021, drivers were actually shutting down earlier than usual just because they had made so much money throughout the year.
2020, 21, and 22 as well, I would even say. 22, at the tail end of 22 is when we started to see that scale start to tip back towards normal. But drivers had made so much money through those previous 2 years that you could go home December 15th and just say, I'm not going to start up again until some guys stayed home for a month. And just for 30 days. Like, I'm not moving.
Yeah.
And I can't blame them. If we were all so fortunate to have a situation like that, I'd be surprised if most of us said no to it. Yeah. But there are also drivers who view this as a golden opportunity to make more money. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're going to try and do. So they're going to go out there and say, hey, you need this load picked up 2 days before Christmas. I'll do it for a premium. And some guys it's going to be a tale of two sides of the same coin, right? So some drivers are going to view this as an opportunity to make as much money as they possibly can because they know there's going to be hot shipments that need to go over the holiday or near the holiday, and they're going to charge a premium for that because they're working over that holiday and they want to be compensated for it. That's the whole reason they're out there. Then there's going to be other guys who are in a hurry to get home for Christmas and they don't want to miss something or they don't want to miss a holiday with their family. So they might just take a shipment for dirt cheap and say, hey, pay for my gas and I'll just bring it there. I don't care. And jet off to get home in time. So it's, I wouldn't bank on that. If you're planning your freight schedule, like, well, we'll just find a guy who needs to get home for the holidays and we'll save some money. Don't do that. You're going to wind up burned more often than not. Yeah. So, but as far as, that's generally speaking for the van and reefer market. And you'll see the same thing as far as capacity crunches go around the holiday for the open deck side of things. But open deck freight in general cools down this time of year. It starts probably in October and really intensifies in the month of December because majority of the country stops its construction process during this time of year. So you think about the entire northern half of the United States, you're not doing road construction in December. It's just not feasible. As much as I wish we could here because I'm sick of my summers being dropped down to one lane trying to go to Minneapolis. And that 90-minute drive turns into 3 hours. But you work with what you got. And another thing that people don't understand, well, I won't say they don't understand, but I think it slips people's minds is when you book open deck freight coming from the south. Say you're a shipper who's in Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Texas, and you book a shipment going to Sioux Falls, South Dakota in December. And suddenly that lane costs a little bit more money and you're like, well, why is that? you have to imagine what it would be like to untarp a product when the temperature is 8 degrees.
Yeah.
And you're outside and the winds are gusting at 25 miles an hour and it's 8 degrees, but your wind chill is minus 25. And you're a driver who's holding on to essentially a gigantic sail, trying to pull that off the truck. It's not desirable, and guys don't want to deal with that. So they'll either say no or they'll ask for an arm and a leg. And you have to kind of decide there. Now, it's not, I'm not saying you can expect, these catastrophic rate increases for open deck freight, but just something to be cognizant of when you're booking freight from the south going into the north, open deck. And just be aware that that's what you're sending drivers into. The weather is also going to play a massive factor into transportation and logistics because ice storms, which are prevalent in the Midwest, can make certain roads undrivable. It's impassable. And drivers are going to err on the side of caution, as they should. You're driving a 80,000-pound combined tractor-trailer combination. You really can't afford to lose your ability to stop that machine. And there's plenty of videos all over YouTube over what flash ice storms can do to a highway situation. And people have seen those YouTube videos of cars, 80, 90, 150 car pileups on highways and semi-trucks that can't stop, that just plow into them. And it's not worth the risk. And that'll definitely be a factor into transportation. Yeah.
So with the changing weather and changing daylight hours, changing weather in the northern United States, it's flexibility, right? Is that kind of what you're trying to stress?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this goes across all equipment types, is flexibility, but also avoiding these situations where you can, right? Now, the weather, you can't avoid that. That's just, it is what it is. But for planning purposes, if you have the option and ability to move your freight before a holiday or before or after the holiday, I should say, you need to do it. It's going to save you a ton of time, a ton of headache, and potentially a ton of money too, if you have the ability to do so. Now, like I said, I understand some customers and some shippers don't have that option. It's got to go when it's got to go. Fine, totally understand. But that's where that flexibility comes into play.
Yeah.
So if you're saying like, okay, well, I have to ship on the 22nd and the 23rd, the couple days before Christmas, be flexible and get a window, right? So if something's ready on the 20th, try and say, hey, the 20th, between the 20th and the 23rd, just get this thing on the road, because it's chaos during that time of year. And your trucking companies and your carriers, your brokers, they're all going to be trying to service their customers as best they can.
Yeah.
But it's chaos out there. And everybody knows that, from all the way from the dispatcher to the driver to the broker to the shipper to the consignee. They all know it's chaos out there. So a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of patience with everybody involved in the supply chain is going to go a long ways. It's already a stressful time of year for a million different reasons. Don't add to that by just being unpleasant,
right?
I'll say.
Yeah.
So
are you seeing the usual uptick in retail freight volumes, or general commodities moving?
Surprisingly, not as much as I had anticipated.
Yeah, that was kind of the what I'd been hearing around the office too.
But we always knew that we were going to go. We knew that this season wasn't going to be as intense as ones past, and that's because people just aren't spending as much, which that's fine. There's still a small uptick, but my team in particular doesn't work with a lot of retail customers. There's other teams on the floor that do, but even from what I've heard from them is uptick, sure, as much as we thought, no. And in some instances, they haven't seen it at all. But
interesting.
But we knew that going into this year, that it was going to be different.
Spending patterns are changing. Do you ever run into additional capacity issues? Because at this time of year, as retailers, like we talked about, maybe it's not happening as much, but as they stock up inventory, like bigger trucking companies end up dedicating larger portions of their fleet to those.
Folks are always going to commit to their larger customers, right? Because those are the guys that are putting food on the table. So if a carrier has a customer that they're contracted with and they go, hey, instead of these 5 trailers, I need 20, then they're going to give that customer those 20 trailers because that's the person who's keeping food on the table, like I said. So I would expect there could be some capacity issues there. But that's like we've talked about in the past. A diverse network is a strong network. So being willing to have 4, 5, or 6 dependable, reliable, carrier broker options, a mixed bag of both, having your asset guys, having your brokers, they both can provide what you need, and both are great in differing situations. So like I said, that's going to be your best weapon against any kind of chaos in the industry. It's just a strong, healthy, reliable network that you have good relationships with those carriers, and they have good relationships with you. So it goes both ways. You want to have a strong relationship with your carrier, with your broker, with your asset-backed guys. They need to have a good relationship with you. That's what's going to benefit you the most.
What about going into 2024? Can you give me any insight or any of your thoughts on what you think 2024 is going to look like from a transportation perspective? I know 2023 has been difficult for trucking companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that return to reality, right?
Yeah.
So 24, we're anticipating that we're going to see a lot of the smaller and newer players exit the market.
Yeah.
Because people made ill-advised decisions when starting trucking companies and brokerages in 21 and 22. It was, I know it seemed like a really good time to get in, but the problem is that it didn't last forever. And anybody who's been in this game long enough knows that it wasn't going to last forever.
Yeah.
So guys bought trucks with enormous interest rates and outrageous markups, and
which they could afford at the time.
Which at the time when you were getting paid $6-7 a mile, yeah, you can afford that. It's easy at that point, but rates are back to reality now.
Yep.
And a lot of those guys are going to exit the market, which is unfortunate. Nobody wants to see that. We don't root for anybody to fail, right? But it is what it is. So the smaller guys are going to exit the market. This would be a good time to reevaluate the strength of your network, seeing how your carriers are doing. If you've got guys that are talking about not making enough money or needing to keep their trucks moving, or they're kind of almost begging for a little bit higher rate or begging for some freight, that speaks to a level of instability. In my eyes, how I see it anyways, that would be a red flag to me that maybe everything isn't so great there. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean don't go with them. It just means be cognizant that they may not be around forever. And it can happen to anybody, right? Some of the big players are being impacted by this as well. But just making sure that you're working with a company that's made sound decisions over the past couple of years, folks who didn't see money and get dollar signs for eyes and jump and make a ton of purchases that weren't necessary, that really jeopardizes their stability.
It's hard to weed those out, I would imagine, though, as somebody who's trying to vet a transportation network. Yeah. Especially, we've seen like companies of all sizes going out of business over the last 6 to 8 months.
Nobody saw Yellow leaving the industry. Nobody saw that.
Yeah, they were massive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was a multi-billion-dollar company, and now they're gone. And it is difficult to spot, right? Because the folks that you're interacting with are most likely on the sales side of things, and as salespeople, they're taught to talk about how awesome they are and why everything's great.
They might not even be keyed into this.
Well, exactly, struggles. And that's sales reps for anything. Yeah. That's for any product, service, device, whatever. Sales reps are always taught to, this is why we're awesome. This is why you need to go with us. And everything's great. Don't worry about it. Yeah. And like you said, they may not even be keyed in on the fact that something's wrong. Yeah. And so they may have just been just as blindsided as everybody else, or they were keyed in on it, but they're instructed, hey, it's not looking good.
Yeah.
But we're going to be okay. We're still awesome. Make sure you keep telling people that. And that's what they're going to do because that's their job, right? That's what they're paid to do.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a company who was going through hardships and their sales reps are like, yeah, it's not looking good, but I really would like you to give us a chance. Like that's not how that works. You're not going to sell anything that way. So,
do you see a fair, are we coming into like RFQ season for a lot of companies?
So RFQ season typically runs, and every company's different, but we notice that the bulk of our RFQs start in October and go through Q1 of 24. So probably by the end of March 24 is when we should see the bulk of our RFQs done and over with. So this is a big time of year to get it done. You don't typically see a ton in December because of the holidays and the chaos that goes with it. And I can't think of many logistics professionals that are like, yeah, it's complete chaos right now, but we should definitely do an RFQ on top of everything else we got going on. So most of them happen in October and November.
Okay.
And then December, January, not so much.
Yep.
But tail end of January, February, March, yeah, you'll see.
And then different industries do it at different times.
Yeah, I mean, we've had customers, and it depends on the length of their RFQ, right? So we have customers that do quarterly RFQs. We have customers that do 6-month RFQs. We have customers that do annual RFQs. We have customers that do RFQs in the fall, like most folks. We have customers that do RFQs in the middle of June. It just depends on when they want to do them, when their business model is, and it kind of depends on their market too, right? So For some customers, it might make sense to do an RFQ in June because that's when their business is at its most stable and they have the time and ability to evaluate options at that point. For other folks, that might be complete chaos and not feasible. So
Okay. Nice. So anything else about December? I know we talk about, the end of the month is always more expensive. The end of the quarter is always more expensive. Shipping around a holiday is more expensive. You got 2 holidays, the end of a quarter and the end of a month in a span of 6 days.
at the end of a year.
At the end of a year.
And the end of a year. So
that final week is basically just try not to ship.
I mean, it's the same every year. That was the one thing I noticed that was pretty consistent from the before times of 2018, 2019, and the after times of 2021, 22 was the holidays were still chaos. And that was pretty much the one constant. The only thing that changed was the lagging period after the holidays dragged on for much longer than we anticipated. I don't know that we'll see that this year. It's the only change I can think of. It's going to be chaos. Just buckle up, plan accordingly, be patient. We'll get through it. We do it every year.
Yeah. And call Josh if you need any help shipping freight.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a team of professionals under me, so
yeah, perfect.
Happy to help.
Okay, thanks, Josh. You have been listening to the Transportation Industry Podcast, Beyond the Road, produced by Anderson Trucking Service. If you liked what you heard here today, make sure to follow along wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss our next episode, which we publish multiple times per month. I'm trying to commit to that multiple times per month. I can get you. For more transportation-related information and tools, go over to the ATS Learning Hub at atsinc.com/learning-hub. On the Learning Hub, you will find a comprehensive library of answers to transportation's most common questions in the form of articles, videos, case studies, podcasts like this one, downloadable tools, and more, all created to help you become the supplier that always delivers for its customers.